I was a competitive gymnast in town here for a long time, probably maybe a little under 15 years. That sort of sport comes with a high training volume, and so I was sort of used to doing whatever 25 plus hours a week of training, and you sort of have a big void in your day when that stops. I picked up CrossFit when I met some friends that were doing it in Montreal, and we sort of just a few buddies hanging out, and it sort of kept you honest and kept you working. So it was just fun, an easy way to keep myself moving and stay in shape to start with. But I think my athletic background kind of lended itself to learning the movements quickly, and I ended up getting into some competitions, little local competitions early on, and had some success, and sort of just, it kind of happens one step at a time, and before you know it, you're at the bigger events and at the regionals, and you start to set goals accordingly. So yeah, it kind of just fell into it in a way, and it took off pretty quickly. So for me, it was always, and it still is, kind of just a hobby, and yeah, as you get higher up in the events and stuff, it's a bigger deal. It's a bigger show when you go to something like the CrossFit Games, and it's huge. But it's still sort of, I have to keep my priorities in line and remember why I'm doing it. So I went to my first regional in 2014 and kind of barely scraped in qualifying to go there, and then I ended up finishing 5th there, because at that time I was a bit more of a specialist. I won 2 events outright out of 7, but was still very body weight and gymnastics oriented, and I couldn't move the heavy bars or do any of the strength events as well as a lot of the other athletes. So I got buried in a couple, and I ended up finishing 5th overall out of like 40 athletes. And at that time, only 2 qualified for the games. I mean, you kind of have a taste of success, and then you're like, okay, well, maybe I can actually do this. So the next year, I put a little more into it. And sort of trained to compete a bit more. This year, I kind of had different goals. Like, the plan was to go back. My goals going into each competition were always changing, for one thing, and they were always a little bit loftier this year. I started, the Open is the first qualifying round that goes, you qualify in your region, but they rank everybody worldwide as well. And I ended up finishing the Open, which is 5 weeks long, in 8th in the world. So then moving into regionals after that, it was sort of like, okay, like you can't finish 8th in the world and then not qualify for the games. So I had an expectation on myself to qualify, which isn't exactly a good thing, I don't think, but I definitely had high expectations of myself going into that event. Moving into the games, it was sort of the same. Initially, my plan was to try to finish top half in your first year there. And then as the competition wore on, I sort of was in that top 10 and in that conversation. So I started to sort of adjust my goals and try to shoot a little higher by the end of the competition, and luckily found some success. So I knew on Sunday that like the points were going to matter every event, and I knew who I needed to beat in which events, and it's sort of, as much as you want to put your best effort in and sort of say I did the best that I could do, like, yeah, you want to finish on the podium and you want to win. Like, everybody there is a competitor. So I was pretty aware of what the situation was, especially going into those last 2 events. And like I said, I fortunately had enough left in me to get it done, but it was close. It's surreal, obviously, and I don't think I really appreciated it for what it was. I think having been there just for the first time and had success like that right away, that doesn't happen very often. There's very few athletes that get that. So I think that for me, I don't think it'll really hit until maybe next competition season, when I start and I have to try to qualify all over again, and you have to struggle and you have to fight your way back to that position again. Then I think it'll mean a lot more, having been there once you had to fight for it again, and you maybe realize how hard it is. At the end of everything, it's such a release that you're like, oh, well, I'm on the podium and that's great, but you forget the 5 days it took you to get there real quick, it's for sure. A few people have joked with me saying that I messed up by ranking so high in my first year. They're like, well, like, where do you go from there? So now you got to get second or first. Maybe that's the goal. Well, I'm fortunate here in town is probably one of the better gyms around in Canada, for sure. Jason McDonald, that runs Pure in town, is one of the higher ups around the CrossFit company. He's one of the head judges at the games for the teen and masters divisions. He does the level 1 seminar educational staffs for the CrossFit company. So I mean, this is about as good a place as you could come. I'm not here often enough, but whenever I'm home, it's a super good resource to come in and have that available to me to come play around and work out with guys like that.